Okay, so anything that's imaginary. What's true about it? It's imaginary. So what else? Anything that's imaginary. Think of anything you think of that's imaginary. It doesn't have to be in math. Could be anywhere. What is something that's imaginary means what? Made up, right? Not real. Non-real. That's what we're going to deal with today. Why? I'm going to give you any specific examples. Okay, so what I want you to do right now, these are the 3 things we're going to do by the end of tomorrow, because we're not going to finish this today. These are the 3 things that you should know the answers to. Okay, so what is the square root of 16? 4, yeah, absolutely. Why is it 4? Because 4, say that one more time. Because 4 goes into 16, right? But so does 8, so does 2, so does 16. There you go. It's the same number, right? It's the same number times itself. It's the same number times itself. So if that's the case, it's called the square root. So that's one answer. Is there another number that I could multiply by itself and make 16? Say that again, Jose. How about this? Would that give me 16? It'd be positive, right? So I could also have a negative 4 as an answer, right? I could have a positive 4 or a negative 4. Either one of them is the square root of 16, because it times itself will make a positive 16. So knowing that, what's the square root of 81? 9 or negative 9. Good. How about 100? Negative 10. Good. Okay. You guys have done that for a while. You guys started doing square roots probably in elementary school, and then we've seen square roots. We've worked with square roots, right? What happens if we get something like this? What's the square root of negative 16? There is none, right? How do I know? Well, this is how I know. I got a calculator right here. Can't see it. Here we go. I got a calculator right here. So I'm going to put the square root of negative 16. It gives me an error. And what's the error? It says non-real answers. Isn't that imaginary? Anything non-real is imaginary, right? So I go back and it says error. Why does it say error? Because there is no number on the number line that makes that negative 16. So, but we see this, right? Some of you said, raise your hand during the assignment and said, Mr. Flores, I have a negative under here. And you're like, what happens there? Now I'm going to show you. So if we get a negative, we have to deal with it because it's not something that might happen. It's something that does happen. So how do we deal with it? Because our calculator won't give us an answer. Well, we use what's called that's an imaginary number, right? So over here is a true statement. The square root of negative 1. Since it has no number, we give it a letter, I. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this problem, except without, I'm going to separate negative 1 times 16. Right? So now they're separated. Well, what's the square root of regular 16? Because this is a regular 16 now, right? What's the square root of a regular 16? So now I can give it a 4. But then I still have that square root of negative 1 in there. Well, now we can give it a letter, I. So we can say it's 4 times I, or just 4I. What's the other answer that I forgot to write? Negative. So positive 4I or negative 4I? Both of those. So what would the next one be? 9i would be one answer. Negative 9i would be the second answer. How about negative 10 or negative 100? There you go. Oops. Okay. Now, if it's just the square root of 10, a square root of 100, regular 100, then you don't need to worry about the i's. The only time you worry about the i's is when you have a negative underneath the square root, just like these. If we don't have those, don't worry about it. It's just like these guys here, okay? That's the only time we have imaginary numbers. So let's practice this here. What is the square root of negative 15? Or sorry, negative 25. 5i and negative 5i because of the negative sign. Anytime you have a negative underneath the square root, you're going to have an I, guaranteed. That's the only way to solve it. All right, this guy here. Negative 1 times 15. Well, if I take the square root of 15, is that going to be a nice clean number like 5? It's going to be like 5.1 something, 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 right? So what we're going to do is we're going to leave 15 in there. I'm going to leave 15 in there because it doesn't have a nice clean number and I don't want to have to round it. So what is that going to look like? It's going to look like this. It's going to look like I times the square root of 15. Or negative I times the square root of 15. You have to have both. For this one, you have to have both because it could be positive answer, it could be a negative answer. So the last one here, the square root of 31. Does 31 have a nice clean answer like the square root of 25 or the square root of 16 or 81 or 100? No, the square root of 31 is like 5.4 something. So again, I'm going to have an I. I'm going to leave the square root of 31 as what it was before. Okay, I'm not going to round unless they say in the directions round. And it didn't say anything about rounding in the directions, just said practice. Okay, just like on your assignment where it said round, if it said round, then round. If it didn't say round, don't change it to a decimal. Okay. Okay, so now let's look at the next one. So one of the other things you're going to have to do so on the test next week that we take, I'm going to give you one of these guys. And I'm going to say, what is it equal to? So in order to do these, what we're going to do is try to see if there's a pattern. Try to see if there's a pattern and figure it out that way. So let's start with ones that we know. Let's start with this guy here. I to the first power is the same as the square root of negative 1. It says right there, right? It says right there. That's why I put equals negative 1. Okay, just I by itself. So that's the same thing as just regular I. Regular I. Okay. I squared. What's another way of writing I squared? Not so much that. In terms of I, can't I write, isn't I squared the same as I times I? Isn't that the same thing as I squared? The reason I wrote it that way is because don't I know what I equals to? What I equals, right? Don't they equal negative 1? So isn't this really just the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1? What is that going to equal? If you don't know, let's try some ones that we do know. What about the square root of 4 times the square root of 4? Yeah, it's going to be 4, right? Isn't this 2 times 2? So what about this? The square root of 9 times the square root of 9. 3 times 3, which is the same thing as. So what's the rule when we're multiplying square roots? It's the same number, just the square root goes away. So what is this going to equal over here? -1, -1. Okay. I to the third power. Is there another way I can write I to the third power using the stuff I already know? I already know I to the first power is I, and I know I squared is -1. So can I rewrite 3i cubed? Can I rewrite it like this? Is that the same thing as I to the third power? Add the powers, right? Well, let's substitute. What is I to the first I squared equal to? -1. So instead of I squared, I'm going to write -1 times. And then what is I to the first power equal to? I. What's -1 times I? -1i or just -I, right? If you have a -1 times a letter, it's just negative that letter, right? We just assume that there's a 1 in front. Okay. What's another way of writing I to the fourth? I squared times I squared. What is I squared equal to? -1. So isn't it -1 times -1? What is -1 times -1? +1. Okay. Let's do I to the fifth. Yeah, I can do I to the third power times I to the second power, right? Those make 5. I already know what is I cubed going to be. -1. Sorry, I cubed is here, right? That equals -I. And yeah, and what does I squared equal to? -1. So a negative times a negative makes a positive I. Okay. I to the sixth. Break that down. I squared, we can do I squared times what? I to the fourth, yeah. I already know the answer to both of those. It's right here. I squared is -1. What is I to the fourth equal to? +1. So when I multiply -1 times 1, I get -1. Do the next one. Do I to the seventh and I to the eighth. Do I to the seventh and I to the eighth. See what you come up with. Aren't you trying to understand? Okay. No more retakes if you're not even going to help yourself. So how do you make 7? 3 and 4? Is there other ways to make 7 too? 5 and 2? 2 plus 2 plus 3? Like I can make more than this, right? There's other ways to make these numbers. I just chose these two. There's other ways. You'll get the same answer, okay? So we know that I to the third is equal to negative I. And we know that negative I to the fourth is equal to just a regular 1. So what's negative I times 1? Negative I. What do you think, a wild guess, what do you think I to the eighth is going to be? It is. It's going to be positive 1. I'm telling you right now, the answer will be 1. Yeah, Chris, how do you know that? Exactly right, yeah. I to the fourth is 1. I to the fourth is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Is there a pattern going on here? Switching between I and 1 and negative I and negative 1, right? There's 4 different answers I'm getting. There's 4 different answers I'm getting. So without doing any work, or without not necessarily doing any work, what is I to the ninth going to be? I don't have I to the ninth here, right? I don't have I to the ninth here, but if I did have I without doing any work, what is that going to be? You're right, it's going to be I. What is I to the 10th going to be? Negative 1, good. What is I to the 11th going to be? Negative I. What is I to the 12th going to be? Right? It's a pattern. It repeats. It goes odd and even. And it repeats every 4. So what's I to the 21 going to be? You're right, it will be I. What's the quicker way of doing that one? Using the pattern. Because this is what one of these I'm going to give you on the test. On the test next week, I'm going to give you one of these. And guess what? It'll be multiple choice. And I'll give you 4 options. And guess what the 4 options are going to be? Those 4 options. So if I have I to the 21st power, you can break it down, right? You can break it down into I to the 21. I can go I to the 4th, I to the 4th, that's 8. I to the 4th, that's 12. I to the 4th, that's 16. I to the 4th is 20, and then I. You can break it down like that, right? What's I to the 4th? So it's going to be 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times I, which is just I. You can do it like that. But when the numbers start getting high, like 74, I don't want to have to list them all out. So is there a pattern that I can use to get to these big guys? Divide by 4. Yeah, go, Jose. What? Divide by 4. So if I got 48, so if I got 48 here, right? And I divide 48 by 4. What do I get? 12, right? Which one is that going to be on my list here? I to the first, or I to the second, or I, which one is it going to be? Is it going to be, sorry, is it going to be I, -1, negative I, 1? Which one is it going to be? It's going to be 1. Why 1? You guys are right. Because isn't that the only number that's divisible by 4? I don't get a remainder there, do I? 4 divided by 4 is +1. All of these guys would have a remainder. So anything without a remainder, your answer is going to be 1. What about I to the 74th? So let's divide it by 4. Let's try Jose's trick. Divide it by 4. I get 1, 8. I get remainder 2. I get a remainder of 2. So it's not going to be 1 down here. Which one will it be? Well, let's look at some that we knew the answer. What is this going to have? If I divide it by 4, what is it going to have? A remainder of what? Okay, so let's write that down. Remainder of 1. What about when I divide 6 into 4? What is that going to have a remainder of? Okay, so let's write, this one had a remainder of 2. What about 7? What did that have a remainder of? 3. What did 8 have a remainder of? No remainder. This one didn't have any remainder, right? No remainder. $74. What remainder is 74 going to have? So what is the answer going to be? -1. Let me try this one. What is I to the 99th power? What is I to the 99th power? Do that right now. What is I to the 99th power? I to the 99th power. What remainder does 99 have? 2. It has a remainder of 2. So that means your answer is going to be -1. Okay. So tomorrow when we pick up on this, if you're not going to remember this, put little notes to yourself here. What was it? What was it? Does it have a remainder of 3? Someone said 2. Sorry. If it has a remainder of 3, then it's going to be -I. Okay. Okay, we will finish this tomorrow.